that's really been important to my life, and that's what happens in the coaching relationship for me. It's a very sacred space, and it's an incubator space where new things are born that are amazing. And I think that's important to us, not only as coaches who are coaching people or mentoring people, whatever we call it, but in terms of how we live our life, in terms of how we're being, that I want to be a sacred listener to myself and to the big self, but also the little self. I want to be a sacred listener, because if I'm being a sacred listener, then I am going to exemplify in my own life the way I would like to share with my clients that it's possible to be what I know they're looking for.
Hello, coaches, whether you're watching this on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, or somewhere else. I'm here with another faculty interview, and today I'm really pleased to be joined by Dr. Linda Pettit. Linda's someone who I've got to know better and better over the recent years, as she lives in Phoenix, and I'm currently in Phoenix to have some sessions with my coach, Steve Hardison. And so we've got to know each other well, and it really made sense for me to ask her to be on the faculty this year. Not only does she have a really deep grounding in an understanding called the three principles, which was also the foundation of my coach training, and it's something that I use in my work with clients all the time, but she's also worked with Steve Hardison also, and is a student, if you like, of being. And so I wanted to have her talk to us from her own unique perspective of an understanding of both those worlds. And I know that she mentors other coaches and other people who help others. So she's eminently experienced, but also has a wonderful way of really connecting with people. And as we all know, coaching is a relationship business. So welcome, Linda. That was the short intro. I could say so much more about you, and I think so highly of you.
Thank you. And the feeling is mutual. I think so much of you and what you're doing, and I'm just really touched and moved to be a part of this with you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for saying yes. I do appreciate it. I know that your impact of your masterclass that we're going to have for this school is really going to be profound. And what I'm hoping just in the next 20 minutes or so is that we could share a little bit, give people a little bit of a glimpse of what you're going to speak about on your masterclass, and for them to get to know you a bit better as they might be thinking about joining the school this year.
Beautiful.
So let's just start off a little bit, Linda, in terms of you're a wonderful writer. I know you've written a few books as well. But in your mind, tell me what is at the heart of client transformation from your perspective, given all your decades of deep work with people.
That's a fascinating question, and it's one that's preoccupied me for a lot of years, both as a psychotherapist for 40 years and then eventually moving into the coaching world. And years and years ago, I remember asking myself, really, how do people change? What is necessary for change to occur? And there are 5 waves of psychotherapy that all have a different notion about why that happens or how that happens. But it occurred to me somewhere along the way that the only way people changed was via insight. That until they'd had an insight from within about something that they wanted to create in their lives, and then put the resources they had behind that, change was really unlikely. Or it would be halting, or it would seem hard, or it wouldn't last. And so out of that evolved a question for me about how does insight occur for anyone? And I really thought about my own experience of life and how I had had insights, and it just seemed really simple and really clear to me that insight occurs in a space of deep listening. That it's always occurring. It's just a never-ending phenomenon that we're having insights one moment at a time that to me are a divine guidance system. It's the divine thought system that Sydney Banks pointed to with such eloquence. And I really saw that this was before I had any sense of the principles, but I really saw that when I sat with people in a space of very, very deep presence, very, very deep listening at multiple levels, but the most important level was the level that, the best thing I knew to call it was the level of spiritual resonance. Later, I would come across different terminology or find different terminology for it. But that two things would happen. One is that I would have insights about where to go with people when I was listening deeply. I think Steve Hardison refers to it as listening for the gold in people, listening for the love in people, listening for the wisdom that's servicing in people. When I would listen to myself that way, in that presence, I would get guidance about where to go with people, sometimes very strange guidance that I couldn't intellectually make sense of. But over time, I really learned to trust that, and then saw that when I was in that space, it invited the people I worked with into that space, and both in the moment, but also they would start noticing it more beyond our sessions. And so it's really funny in a way, Ankush, because it seems so, I don't know, understated and simple, but I think of myself as nothing more and nothing less than a professional listener.
It's
And I've
such a great
devoted my
thing.
life
Sorry, go on.
to that. No, I've tried to devote my life to that, to just listening well.
It's such a great thing, and irony is not lost on me that I interrupted you there, but it's such an overlooked thing in coaching, and I'd love to draw out, if I may, a little bit
Mm-hmm.
and connect this for people, and why, again, I asked you to, deliver a masterclass for us, and it really is going to be a
Mm-hmm.
masterclass
Mm-hmm.
because what you talk about can be like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, listening, yeah, I got that, but there's a depth to that. I think Steve Hodson calls it a mountain without a top, and that applies to so many
Yeah.
things. But I know when I started coaching, I was listening at a certain level,
Right.
like listening for content, listening just the words of what people were saying. And then over time, as I got better and better and more experienced as a coach, like you talk about, there's a depth of listening, and ultimately to the depth of, spiritual resonance, or I call it soul level listening, and
Mm-hmm.
really connecting with something and hearing things that people might not say, or that they say that other people might miss. And for me,
Mm-hmm.
well, how does this apply to what the essence of the school's about, which is really helping coaches be prosperous in an ethical and sustainable way? Well, I think one thing that people may see or they may not see is that if you can get a glimpse of this, if you can get this a little bit deeper than whatever level you're seeing this at right now, and you have a conversation with someone, I'm not talking about a sales conversation. I'm not talking about like, let's have a discovery call or whatever people call it these days. But just when you're in a conversation with someone and they sense that presence, sense that listening, and
Mm-hmm.
they experience it in a way that they perhaps haven't been listened to by anyone else in their life, then the likelihood of them working with you in a paid capacity just increases. And if we think about that, that's the only logical thing that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Why would it be any other way? So I know when I was starting as a coach, I might have gone, oh yeah, listening, okay, nice to have, but like, well, what do I say to get someone to hire me? Well, what do I need to do on the business side? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with talking about certain aspects of that, but really the presence you have, the and there's so many different different words for this in different language, like the level of consciousness that we might have, or um, the depth of understanding, or who we're being. I see them all so connected. Then that leads to a deeper relationship, which leads to the likelihood of people working with us, if that makes sense for them. And I'd love to hear if I've connected that. Is that the way you see it too?
Yeah, absolutely. It occurred to me as you were talking and I was listening to you, I'm in total agreement with where you're pointing that really at any given time, and including right now, I don't have a huge number of clients, but I have clients who've been with me for 4 or 5 years or 6 years. And it's funny because sometimes I'll talk to them and I'll say, you really ought to move on to someone who can, give you a new perspective but they often don't. They choose not to. And part of what they say is that there's something that's really magical that happens in my presence that they access deeper and deeper levels of their own wisdom and decision making capacity, creative capacity. And that that doesn't come from me or any intellectual sense of where I need to point people or what I'm even trying to accomplish with people. It really comes from that spiritual. What did you call? You had another name for it. The way you
Sort of
listen.
soul level listening or spiritual resonance.
Say soulful listening. Was it
Soul level listening or
soul
spiritual
level
resonance.
listening? Yeah, I love that. It just blanked out of my sound for a minute, but I love that there's just a magic occurs that in that space that I often don't know where it's going. I don't necessarily know that my clients even know in the moment where it's going, but magic happens and they keep moving in the direction that they want to move, and they trust the magic. They trust the miracle that happens. And I experienced that and when I met with Steve Hardison, I've spoken about this publicly, that I intersected with him in a moment in my life where I was really low. I was really in a lot of psychological pain. I think of all psychological pain as spiritual distress. So you could say I was in a lot of spiritual distress. And Steve listened to me so deeply for 7 minutes. And it shifted everything in that moment. And I walked away from that thinking, wow, I want to come back to that incredible power of that kind of listening. Maybe I haven't been as attentive to it as I once was. I'd been introduced to it through Carl Rogers, 40 years ago, and was deeply moved by how he heard so deeply what people were saying to him, because he was just such an extraordinary listener and he was listening at that level. And so I circled back to that and really, I don't know, maybe even came to a new appreciation for it for myself, that was at the heart of at least what I do, the way I do it. And it's spirit talking to spirit. I always wondered. I was raised Christian, so I have a lot of connection to Christian scripture, although I didn't think of myself anymore as Christian. But I just have that background. And I would often think about, why did Jesus say, why did Jesus say, whenever two or more of you are gathered in my name, there I am? I think, why two? Why can't that just be sure? Why is it just one? And you could interpret it as one if you think about the body and the spirit as having a relationship. But there's something in there for all of us to think about, that there's kind of an exponential magic that takes place in that sacred space. And I read your post recently on Facebook about the sacred relationships you have in the immersions that you do with men. Sacred not meaning religious, sacred meaning this holy, beautiful space where creation occurs. New creation occurs, new ways of thinking about the self, new ways of understanding, new ways of seeing where to go next. That that that's that's really been important to my life, and that's what happens in the coaching relationship for me. It's a very sacred space, and it's an incubator space where new things are born that are amazing. And I think that's important to us, not only as coaches who are coaching people or mentoring people, whatever we call it. But in terms of how we live our life, in terms of how we're being, that I want to be a sacred listener to myself and to the big self, but also the little self. I want to be a sacred listener, because if I'm being a sacred listener, then I am going to exemplify in my own life the way I would like to share with my clients that it's possible to be what I know they're looking for. So I seek a high level of congruence between the way I live and am and the work that I do. And that begins with my own listening and seeing where spirit, mind, God, wisdom, whatever you want to call it, wants to lead me. I have utter faith in that.
That is gold. I love what you just said, Linda. Um, there's so much gold in that. And again, I want to connect this in kind of my language a little bit, that
Mhm.
the 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 more in, how do you say it, the more incongruence we are with, you know, spirit or whatever, like I think there's this paradox in a way that as coaches, we don't need to be perfect. I don't think people hire perfect. People don't hire perfection. And it's hard to have a relationship with that. You can be impressed by people who are perfect, but we don't connect with that. We kind of put them on a pedestal. And that's something I learned from Steve Chandler. So we don't need to be that. And at the same time, the more in line we are with what we are sharing, people are drawn to that. They are drawn to a quality of life. And it's not even a quality of life, that's the wrong language, but the quality of presence that someone has. Like, do I want to have the kind of life that Linda has, or aspects of that, in terms of, is she a happy person? Right? It's like, Steve Chandler wrote this brilliant newsletter once where he said, no one wants to hire an unsuccessful success coach, right? And you could say like a relationship coach who's always arguing with their spouse. That's not really a good person to hire. Or a business coach who doesn't know the first thing about business and is all over the place. So that congruence is so important, and I underestimated that when I first became a coach, and it can seem a little bit nebulous, but I've seen that that's really so much part of our professional development as coaches, to keep walking that path. And I know, we've got this short time today, but I know I'm looking forward to learning from your masterclass, because even in this, I'm hearing things for myself deeper about listening, and listening to myself, and where can I be even more in congruence with who I want to be. This is again another one of those things of a mountain without a top. I love that you shared that.
Yeah, I love that. I love your humility and your vulnerability and I love the way you present yourself and talk about your own growth and your own development. I've seen that in other coaches who've come through your school, this level of vulnerability and transparency that is really important to me. I think it just helps people connect to us. I wrote a funny little poem. It'd be fun to share it with your coaches at some point. It's called The Coaches of Instagram.
All right.
It's really silly in a way, but it's like, do people realize that as a coach of Instagram, I fold rags next to my washing machine, just like they do? And that that I have go arounds with my husband, just like they do. it's, it's people I work with know that I'm just very real. And that's the kind of life I want to live, is a real life, a real life where I'm accepting of the wholeness of myself and the ups and downs, ins and outs, funnies and tragedies of life. And I think that kind of relationship that's so transparent and so congruent, it just naturally leads to the evolution of spiritual consciousness. because the trust level gets so deep and the sharing gets so deep. And that's what I love, to really be able to connect with people in that transparent, congruent, present space, love the whole of them, have them loving the whole of me, and knowing that in the quietness of all that, the kind of creation magic that you talk about, or that Steve Chandler or Steve Hardison talks about, which added so much to my understanding of coaching, just happens really naturally. It just happens very organically,
You
because
know, this,
in that space where two or more of you are gathered in humility, in faith, in love, 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 exponential magic can occur.
beautiful. I know the coaches that are going to be in your masterclass, they're going to get so much from it, and it's going to be practical because, and I've seen this in previous years when we've had masterclasses in the AJC, is people don't just get inspired and then get into a nice feeling and then that's it. It's going to be very interactive. They're going to get to ask any questions and really get this in them in a way. And I've seen it every year that in the weeks after a masterclass, we get people sharing stories of like, hey, I did this differently with a client. I listened deeper. I shifted this and I've had this result or that's happened. And then sometimes even months later, someone will sign up a biggest client they've ever had or something like that. And they'll just say, hey, this I got this from the masterclass 5 months ago, or when someone shared that about listening, it's really shifted something in me when I go into these conversations now with people who can hire me. I bring a different energy or quality of listening. And, I love that you said about transparency and honesty. I was reminded of two different things. One of my mentors used to say, he was a relationship coach. He said, every relationship begins with its first fight.
Mm.
And in a business context, one of my boss's boss's boss, when I was in my early 20s, he used to say, the procurement team, we were dealing with suppliers. He said, it's really easy to have a good relationship with a supplier when things are going well, but you actually find out what a good supplier is when things go bad. So he goes, having something not work out, it's not a bad thing. He goes, it's an opportunity to find out. And I heard both of those things and what you were saying about the messiness of life and being real life. And I think what people look for is not perfection, but like when stuff happens, as it does for all of us, how do you deal with that? Do you deal with that with like elegance and, in line with spirit as best you can? And sometimes it might take a while. And I've really seen that. And I know I'm drawn to that in people that I work with.
Mhm.
Is there anything else you want to say before we wrap this up today?
No, just that I'm really excited. I've had the sense from watching the evolution of your school that it's very special, and that something very magical and beautiful happens, and that people feel an evolution in how they show up and what they're able to do. And I'm just thrilled to be a part of that,
Beautiful. Well, thank you so
and
much for.
thrilled about you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm really thrilled that you're part of it. I'm thrilled you said yes. I'm so glad to have you with us in this cohort, and I'm excited. We will be sharing more stuff from Linda online as we go forward with enrollment for the school. So look out for that, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again soon, Linda. Thank you.
You too as well. Thank you.